I'm Kenny Boddye with Kevin Davis Insurance Services, and today I will show you a presentation on cyber and data breaches. Cyber is an emerging risk in the association world. It's an emerging risk in the insurance world. And today I'm going to sort of focus on what a data breach is, a cyber breach, and how that sort of deals with community associations. So first, a data breach, a cyber breach can be a number of different things. It isn't just your traditional hacker breaking into a computer system and stealing things. A breach can constitute of a hack. So any sort of access to data that is unauthorized to that person. So if a bank, for example, is responsible for your bank information, your checking account balance, for example, your credit card balance, that information is supposed to be kept safe by them. Your money is supposed to be kept safe by them. If someone who's not authorized to get that information gets that information, that's a breach. So associations, if they're supposed to have your banking information for your association fees, your rents, any other information they may have on file for you. So let's say when you were applying, you had to give them your social security number because they did a background check on you. That is information they're legally obligated to keep safe from outside people who are unauthorized. If that information is taken, then that is a breach. Another example of a breach is if a computer system is infected with a computer virus from a communication from an outside party. How this works out in associations is if the property manager or the association itself, one of the board members, sends out a newsletter or sends out an email to someone else, and that email is infected with a virus, that can be a breach, because even if there wasn't information stolen, they are still legally responsible to control the types of information they're sending out, the types of messages they're sending out, and if a computer virus infects someone else's computer, that would also be a breach. Another type of breach is paper files. So everyone sort of thinks that cyber and data is just stuff that's stored on computers or stored on the internet or in a USB drive in the cloud somewhere. No, what we see a lot of is with associations, especially property managers, who are, they like having paper. They like having those old paper files that everyone is used to seeing, especially when you're filling out applications. If those get stolen or those are lost or they're even destroyed improperly, that can constitute a breach, because again, it's that personal information that's out there in the public. Finally, you have access to computer systems. So if you're an association, for example, who you have a website where people can log in to pay their dues, see information on the association. Property manager has a website to log in, order work requests for your unit, that kind of thing. If you're supposed to have access to that website and you're not given access, that's also a breach. So it doesn't even need to be stolen data or stolen anything or even a computer virus. There's also, if you're supposed to have access to a website, you're not given access, you can sue for that. Next thing is, what kind of information are we talking about? There are a few different types of information that are considered PII, or personal identifiable information. And there are different sort of criteria for that. The first is what's called non-public personal information. And those are things that should not be out there in the public space. That should be private information that only those people who are they themselves know about it, and the institutions that they keep that information with. Common stuff, and these are defined by states, but common things that are non-public personal information are things that you use for if you're signing up for something. The personal questions they ask to make sure they know it's you. So like your mother's baby name, the date that you got married, your hometown, stuff that may not be out there in the public sphere and shouldn't be in the public sphere, but somehow got out there. That would be non-public personal information. Medical records, medical info, HIPAA type stuff. So how this sort of breaks out with associations is, usually associate medical information with hospitals, with your doctor. How would an associate get that information? Well, there are some associations out there where, especially if they have older folks, they have older homeowners that might have emergency contacts, or there's some assisted living facility information on file with that association. If that information gets taken or stolen or gets out there where it's not supposed to be, that can be a breach as well. Another type of information that people can have that would constitute, personal identifiable information is, social security numbers, credit card numbers, bank information, PINs, passwords, all sorts of things where if it's a number or a set of numbers or digits or anything that's unique to you, like an ID number or anything like that, that's also personal identifiable information. And if someone who's responsible for that loses that information or it gets stolen, that would also constitute a breach. So if you have an association, for example, who has a website, or they have even a condo building or an apartment building that has a key, like a key in to actually get into the building, and each, the key is different for each person. And if that gets taken, if that gets out there and it's unique to you, that's also a breach. So all these different things, when combined, is called personal identifiable information. And all those things, even if one of them is stolen, that constitutes a cyber breach or a data breach, and that's why you sort of need the cyber coverage. The next part is, we talked about the information. We talked about what a breach actually is. Well, a lot of you are probably wondering, how much does this cost? What is a breach? What do I do? The biggest thing the biggest question you'll hear is, what do I do when there's a breach, and what is a breach? Now, we've already talked about what a breach is. Now, what do you do when there's a breach? Several states have notification guidelines. 48 out of 50 states in the United States have specific state-mandated guidelines on what you need to do when there's a breach. Notification guidelines. So anyone who's been affected, you are required by law to let them know that they've been affected by the security breach. There's also many states that require additional things like free credit monitoring. So you're required usually by law to buy 365 days, a year's worth of free credit monitoring for anyone who got affected by a breach, just in case someone uses their information for identity theft. Some states even require the company who got breached to set up a call center. And that's important because if people aren't sure really what happened, they don't really know what happened and who they need to talk to and the things that have been set up to keep this from happening again. There's a call center in place for them, so they can call in and get that information, figure out what their next steps are, figure out how they get the credit monitoring that we talked about, and if there's anything else they need to do on there to make sure that their information is safe now, and to make sure that their assets and their property isn't at risk because of that breach. A breach also constitutes that failure to notify. So I talked earlier about the different kinds of breaches. Now, if a breach occurs, part of that legal liability is making sure all those parties are notified. If you don't notify anyone, that's also a breach, and that's part of what the policy should cover. There are some policies out there where they may cover some of the notification. They may cover getting sued, the liability, the defense portion of it. But you need to make sure that your policy covers the liability. So if there's a lawsuit as a result of a breach, you want to make sure they cover the actual notification. So that includes not only the notification itself, but a forensic investigation into who was affected, who wasn't affected, and who needs to be notified. This can be, past, present, or even future applicants to live at the association. This could be past, present, or future employees of the association, or the property manager. That's another point. The property manager is also an insured under our policy, and they should be underinsured under any cyber policy that the association carries. And the reason for that is, in a lot of situations, the property manager itself is the one who manages a lot of this information, a lot of this data. And if they are the ones who are breached, the association should want to be able to seek coverage under their own policy. The last component should be covered under the policy, and what's important and what costs money under a cyber breach is public relations. So, for example, if this association, big, small, high-rise, low-rise, high-end, what have you, they have a reputation. People want to live there. People might not want to live there anymore if there's a breach, especially the property manager. obviously that property management company, they have clients. They have more. Usually, they have more than one association that they manage. If a property management company has a security or a data or a cyber breach, they're going to face bad press about it. They're going to face the news. They're going to face, internet articles. They're going to face a wide variety of bad press that could impact their reputation. So you have a situation, if there's a breach, where that could impact their business. So you have the association, you have people who may want to sell or rent out their units. They can't find a buyer or a renter anymore because someone heard that, hey, you guys got breached. I don't want to live there anymore. And for the property manager especially, chances are they're not going to see any new association clients or any new communities that want them to manage their association if they hear that there's been this breach and there was no sort of public relations involved. What the public relations should do, they should get out there, have press conferences. They should control the narrative by writing their own news stories about what happened. Sort of reframing what happened into, yes, they got breached. Yes, there was a security breach, but they did X, Y, and Z to make sure that their unit owners and their employees and their property manager employees were not adversely affected by the breach. So that can include the things that come in the policy itself. The component of the free credit monitoring, the forensic investigation to make sure that only those folks who were impacted were actually contacted and not everyone and their mother. Those are the things that are part of that breach. The next part of it is the other thing to remember, and I mentioned this earlier, is paper files are covered. So you have actual paper files, and I will give you an example of a claim scenario where paper files came into play. There was this community association. It was an apartment, a cooperative apartment in New York City. They had an older property manager, and they came to a newer one. Well, when they transitioned to that new property manager, the property manager inspected the grounds. He went down to the basement of that apartment, did an inspection, found out that there was this basement room that wasn't locked, that was full of filing cabinets. No one really knew what was in those filing cabinets. The old manager had already departed. They couldn't really ask him. That new property manager had to, inspect that room also. So they took all those filing cabinets and they put them out on the street while they inspected that room to make sure it was structurally sound, make sure there were no leaks, that sort of thing. While those filing cabinets were sitting out on the street, someone came by, knocked them over, and one of them opened, and there were tons of application in there for people that used to live there, people that currently live there, and people that had applied but hadn't done it. Now, cooperative apartments in New York City, they mean business. They do very many things that a lot of associations don't necessarily do. One of the things that specific association did was they did a background check. So those applications included, criminal records. They included social security numbers because a credit check was part of it. They included past residences. They included also past places where those people worked as part of the background check. So this is a lot of information that was just out on the street. You have papers, tons of papers flying out in New York City. You have cyclists going by, you have cars going by. The longer they were out there, the more papers got out there. That's a breach. You may not associate that with a cyber breach because most people think that, hey, it's just hacking. But again, no, it is. It includes paper. Another component of this, and now I'll go sort of break down the different insurance agreements that you should have under your cyber policy. Again, so you have your liability. Now, this is your normal duty to defend liability coverage. So if there's a lawsuit as a result of the breach, the insurance company should be able to hire an attorney to represent your association, and your property manager be able to defend them in courts. The second component is regulatory. So what happens is that in many cases, if there was a large negligence, not only do you have individual unit owners or property manager employees or anyone else who was affected by the breach suing you, but you also have the state attorney general or HUD or some other governmental organization coming down and filing a lawsuit on their behalf against your association, against your property management company. especially in the case of property managers, they may get an EEOC complaint filed against them because of the breach, because you have people's W-2 information out there, you have their Social Security information out there, all the stuff that someone would need in order to set up fraudulent bank accounts, file tax returns fraudulently, those sorts of things that would impact people on a very financial substantive level. So again, it should cover these lawsuits by the feds, and it should also cover, and this is unique to this coverage, fines and penalties. Part of the coverage that we offer is we will cover the fines and penalties incurred by the state and federal and local governments that go against the association. The next part is, as I mentioned before, notification. So included in notification is the notification itself, the credit monitoring, and the call center. And the policy itself will handle that. They'll reimburse the association if they incur these fees themselves, but in most situations, the insurance carrier, when the claim is filed, will set it up with a third-party vendor, and that third-party vendor will be responsible for sending out all the notices within the state-mandated guidelines. They will also set up that credit monitoring, and they will set up that call center. So that association, they don't need to worry about that. You know, a lot of these association board members, they probably are not aware of the required state guidelines. The property managers aren't usually necessarily up on that either. So to have this third-party vendor who's aware, who knows all the guidelines, and is able to take care of it on their behalf is of immense value to the association and to the property manager. And that final component of what the policy should cover is that crisis management and PR aspect of it. Because again, you stand a real chance of having real financial consequences of having your association be breached. And if that happens, there needs to be someone on their side in order to change the narrative and help mitigate and lower the impact to their reputation. The last thing I will talk about is the relationship between the property manager and the association. A lot of our folks out there who are listening to this who know the relationship between the association and the property manager, especially for those property managers where they can handle all the data, a question you're probably asking yourself right now is, well, what if the property manager itself has a cyber policy? Does the association necessarily need the policy themselves if they carry? The answer is yes. And there's a couple of different reasons why that's the case. One is if you never really know what kind of policy your property manager has. They could have a policy in place, but what's their deductible? They may have a policy in place, but are their associations named insureds on their policy? They may have a policy in place, but what does their management contract say about who's liable in the event of a breach? If you review that management contract, if that management contract was drafted over 5 or 10 years ago, there's probably a good chance that there's no mention of breaches at all. At that point, you have legal ambiguity. Who's responsible for it? Do you have a property manager who makes the right decision and handles it themselves and files another policy if they have one? Or do you have a property manager who makes the stand of, hey, I am carrying this information on your behalf, I'm handling this information on your behalf, therefore, since this happened, it's on you to protect me. And that is one of the biggest situations where we don't want there to be ambiguity. We want the association itself to carry their own policy, because then if there's a question of who is responsible for what and who's liable for what, the carrier is going to be all put on notice. They can talk to it. Another reason why it's really important for the association itself to have their policy is if the property manager, for example, they're the ones that get breached and the association's data gets lost. That property manager may decide that they want to do their own internal investigation first before putting out notices, figuring out who's been, affected. In that time, there is still requirements by the state that the association and the property manager need to abide by in order to avoid those fines and penalties I spoke about previously. If that property manager decides that they want to, take extra time to do even more investigation, that association could be at risk. They could, go after that deadline. They could face, more additional lawsuits because they didn't tell anyone in the proper amount of time. They may face additional scrutiny by the state and federal government. And another component of what could come into play here is if there was a gross negligence and a gross violation and a gross just carelessness, which led to the loss and led to the data being out there, the state may require the association to come up with a comprehensive cyber security strategy. And what that means is they need to actually put forth, with legal jargon in it, legal language in it, a complete report of what they will do and the controls and security they will put into place to ensure that a breach like this will never happen again. And if it does happen again, that their residents and their employees and their property manager will be protected, and that their information, even if it's breached, that those people will have protections in place to make sure that fraud doesn't occur. And that can be something that a lawyer will have to draft. So the policy also covers that, but that's yet another reason why the association itself should have its own policy, because otherwise they're relying on the property manager's policy to respond to a wide variety of things that may be specific to this one association, and it may take a long time just to coordinate the logistics, especially if the property managers themselves had this breach and it affected, some of these associations, some of these property managers handle hundreds of associations, sometimes thousands. And if they're all breached, you don't want to have to wait to that property manager to get to your association for your association to the coverage that they need. So those are the various things that a property management association have to deal with cyber. What this looks like if there's an actual claim. Let's say the property manager and the association, they have a payments system for their rents, for their fees, for maintenance, for that sort of thing. And part of that is you have to input credit card data or bank account information to get EFT done for that payment. Hackers can go in there, they can get behind the scenes, they can hack into that system, they can get in there. An example I'll give you is the association, you have this condo association, and it was earlier on in the year, and one of the residents tried to file their tax returns. They found that someone had already filed their tax returns for them fraudulently. They said that's a little strange, that happens though. So they were just talking to one of their neighbors about, hey, I got fraudulent tax returns filed before I was able to file my actual ones. Their neighbor said that the same thing happened to them. They talked to the next neighbor. They said the same thing happened to them. They come to find out their entire floor of their condo building, everyone had tax returns filed before they did. So you had an entire floor of people who had fraudulent tax returns filed. They looked into a little bit more and they found out that a few months prior, the property manager had been hacked, and they had no idea until the association board members, the unit owners asked the property manager. They said, hey, all these people on this floor had their tax returns filed. The only person the only common nexus, the only common person who held all these people's information was the property manager. The property manager then admitted that they had found out about that hack a few weeks prior, and they were already looking into it. Well, by this time, 30 days had already gone by from the actual time that they found out the hack happened. The actual state that they were in required that within 45 days of them finding out about the hack, that they needed to put everyone on notice. So they quickly let the insurance carrier know what happened. The insurance carrier got on top of it. They did a full forensic investigation that included, finding out from the insured what information was stored on the computers of the property manager, how long ago it had been taken, and it delved into who was actually affected. And from there, the carrier worked with a third-party vendor. They then sent out notices to everyone who was affected, not those that were, just those who were affected. They set up a call center. They set up free credit monitoring for all those people affected. And they sent out notices explaining to those folks that they had that in place to protect them. They also issued a press release because they had saw that there was a news article in the local paper about it. They sent out a press release talking about what happened. They talked about the hack, but they talked about the fact that only a small population, that one floor, that entire building, were the ones that were affected by it. They explained that the association got on top of it immediately, and they changed the entire story. So the property manager was able to retain all of their clients, and people in the building were still able to find renters and buyers for their building. So all in all, they never found that there was no lawsuit that happened, and there was no fines and penalties by the federal government or the state government because they got it taken care of. Other associations probably will not be so lucky, and that's why this policy is so important. That's why an association needs to have their own policy in place so they are fulfilling their requirements for state, federal guidelines, notification guidelines, without worrying about the property manager's exposure and what they're doing to remedy the loss. Thank you.